chord. Oh, yay. All right. Now, so again, I'm in the key of A major here, and I only did it because that's what's set up. So let's say I put a two chord, and I can put a two chord in here. In the key of A, a two chords B, and that's what we call a normal triad. Tri meaning three, three notes.
I don't think you're sharing the screen with us.
Man, I told it to share. Man, this is a total failure. Oh my gosh. It was marked to share. Can you see it now? Can you
Yes.
see? Yes. Oh, thank goodness. Man, this is like killing my ego. It's going to be a long summer now. Okay. So let's try this again. I'm in the key of A because that's where it's set up, and I put a two chord in there. And this is what we call a triad. It's just three notes. And in this particular triad is the way most chords that we know are built. Not all, but most. They're built in thirds. So we have the root, and then a third above that, we have the third of the chord, and a third above that, we have the fifth of the chord. It's five because we count from the root. One, two, three, four, five. It's five lines or spaces. If you count the root as one, the fifth is five, the third is three. So that's a three and a five. It's a regular triad, a chord. Well, every chord, we can put another third on top. We're just building out of thirds. So we can put another third on top. There it is. That's now, instead of being a two chord, that's a 2-7 chord. And let me show you, because this gets confusing. And I try to avoid confusion when I can. So in the key of A, and remember, whenever we have a key, we put the name of the key and a colon. This is what we call a 2-7 chord. Now you notice that the 2 is in Roman numerals, and I have my cap lock on because of finale. Okay, so that the Roman numerals tell you it's the second degree of the scale. It's a chord built on the second degree of the scale. The 7 is in Arabic numerals. That means that there is a seventh over the root, not just a third and a fifth, but also a seventh. So we say out loud 2-7 chord, but we're saying two different things. We're saying second, a chord built on the second degree of the scale that not only has the third and fifth, but has the seventh over the root. So that's written this way, Roman numeral, then Arabic numeral, and we call it a 2-7 chord. We could build this on any chord. We could put sevens on anything. Now, when we learned before, we learned the dominant chord, the 5 chord, we put a seventh on, or a 7 chord, we put the leading tone chord, we put a seventh on, and it just makes them more powerful. Well, it turns out in any time you add a seventh to a chord, you don't change where it's going or its function at all. You just make it more powerful. So a 2 chord wants to go to a 5 chord. That's what it wants to do. It can also go to a 4 or something, but it really wants to go badly to a 5 or a 7, to a dominant chord. So what's a 5 chord in the key of A? It's an E chord. I'm going to put it, just put it straight away, no inversion. Now I can't do it that way. I do have to put it in inversion. Hold on a second. Let's put it this way, just for a second. Now I'm going to fix this later. Now the reason I had to put it in inversion is the rule of all seventh chords is that the 7 goes downward by step. So that if I have an A on the top, the bottom notes, the next note on the top has to be the G sharp. And then everything else just moves smoothly. There's no other difference. But the sevenths go down in all seventh chords. They're no different whether it's dominant seventh or a 2-7 or a 3-7. The 7 goes down by step. So that's good voice leading there. 2 goes down, everybody else just stays as close as it can. That's a 2 chord going to a 5 chord in first inversion. So that's all you sort of need to know about non-dominant seventh chords. They're just like dominant seventh chords. Their function doesn't change. The chord goes exactly where it would have gone. The seventh goes down by step, and it adds some color and power to the chord. Okay, we got that. Now, your second question, Leslie, was about secondary dominance, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
So this is simply a 2-7 going to 5. But it's a 2-7 because you have a minor chord with a minor seventh. And we know that dominant chords are major chords with minor sevenths. So I could make this sound like it's a dominant chord just by changing it from a minor chord to a major chord. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it major. Sharp the middle note, the third, because that changes it from minor to major. Now this sounds like it's a dominant seventh chord because the only chord in a major scale that's a major chord with a minor seventh is the dominant seventh, the 5-7. So that sounds like it's a dominant seventh going to the 5 chord, this chord here, and it's a circle progression, so it works exactly like a dominant would, as if that's 5, 6, 7 to 8. So if I change it, this chord is no longer a 2-7. This chord is now a 5-7, but not in the original key of A, as if it's in the key of E. So as if it's in the key that's the 5 chord. So we say that the 5 chord has been tonicized very briefly. It gets treated like a 1 chord, just briefly. And this chord acts like a 5 going to that 1. So we say it's a 5-7 of the 5 chord, as if the 5 were tonic. And then as soon as we hit this 5, it doesn't sound like tonic anymore. It sounds like a 5, and it will now take us to a 1 chord, which would be this chord. I'll just put it in here to complete the progression. There we go. How did I mess that up? There we go. And that's again not good voice leading. I'd probably put it in a different inversion, but you get the point. Actually, I will put it in a different inversion. I'll put it down here. There, you can actually see the voice leading work now. So secondary dominant is when we alter a note. Usually we sharp the third to make a minor chord major. That's a circle progression away. So the root B goes to the root E. Then the chord sounds like it's a 5 chord of whatever you're going to. So we call it a 5-7 of 5 going to 5, which then goes to 1. There's another way to, so Leslie, you got that so far? Okay. Now the other way that it can happen, let's pretend I'm in the key of C for a minute. I'm only pretend I'll get into the key of C. Okay, key of C. And let's say I have a one chord. One chord. And it goes to a 4 chord. Right? And again, I'll have to change the inversion of this to make the voice leading right, so I'll do that. This is not an inversion I would suggest you use, but I happen to know my voice leading. Now, that chord's a major chord, and it is a circle progression. The root wants to go up to that F. So you'd say, well, why isn't that a secondary dominant? Because I haven't changed any notes in it, and so that still sounds like a 1 chord in C. How could I make this sound like it's a 5 chord going to the 4 chord here, the 5 of 4? Well, if I add a 7th to it, our non-dominant 7th chord, that's a major chord with a major 7th. We could do that. We can make a 1-7 chord. 7 goes down, works fine. But it doesn't sound like a dominant chord because it's a major chord with a major 7th. But instead, if we make it a major chord with a minor 7th, we flat the 7. Now that's a dominant chord. The 7 goes down by step. It takes us to the 4 chord, the F chord. And the way we would write this is the same way. We would say in the key of C now, we have a 5-7 of 4, and it goes to a 4. And so the two things you expect to see for a secondary dominant is either the third is sharped to make a minor chord major, or the 7th is flatted to make a major 7th a minor 7th. Those are the two changes that can make a chord, and then you have to have a circle progression. You have to have the bass go up by a 4th or down by a 5th. And that will give you a secondary dominant. Okay, do we understand that? Okay, I got thumbs up on that. Is everyone clear? Secondary dominants are one of the hardest concepts. Is everyone good with this? I got thumbs up. Okay. So who else has a question? I got 3 thumbs up, so we're good. Anyone else have a question you want to ask me before I go on to the stuff I was going to review? I'd rather review the stuff you don't know than the stuff that I don't know. So anybody else has a question? These are good questions. All right, so I'm about to go and talk a bit about modulations and how to identify them. And but before I do that, let me remind everybody, the final exam will be open book. So what you want to practice and study is the stuff that the book doesn't help you. Like right now, I'm going to show you how to find a modulation. Yeah, we're going to practice writing a modulation. We're going to do some of the stuff that takes time and needs practice. That's the stuff you should study. Looking up a definition, just know what this rough idea of things are so you know where to find them in the book. If you know where to find them, I'm happy because it will be open book test and there will be a few definitions on it. But we're going to try to review the stuff that the book doesn't help you very much. Okay? So if I can ask you guys to turn to page 334. By the way, if you aren't impressed with the fact that you've done over 330 pages, you've actually done about 350 pages. That's a lot of information. This stuff is packed with information. That's a lot to learn. Okay, so if everyone is ready, this is a chorale. So it's a hymn tune that Bach has orchestrated. And if we hear it, I'm not going to write it out, but we'll hear it. Let's see if I can make that happen. Um, I think I have to put. I don't know if it's going to play because I don't have it on piano, but we'll see. Um, it sounds something like this. Um, that's the first phrase. So if you look at the first chord, somebody throw in chat. What is the first chord? What is the first chord? Just put that in the chat if you can, and I'll try and get to the chat so I can see it. What chord is it? This is 15.5 on page 334. What is the first chord? That's your first chord. What is that chord? Throw it in the chat. Inquiring minds want to know. What is it? Do we not have our books, guys? Somebody talk to me about what's going on here. Someone tell me what's happening.
I think I have maybe a different version of the book, or I don't know. It's not the same thing.
Okay, check
Did
it.
you
It
say
says,
336 or 334?
well, it's 334 in my book, but it's assignment 15.5. It's a Bach chorale called Nun
Okay.
Priest alle Gottes.
I think 15.5 might be more helpful.
Let's try 15.5. Yes, I've got a right answer. Yes. Give me one more answer so I know everyone's here. We have enough right answers. So it's a G major, and look at the key signature. The key signature looks like it's G major, so we're pretty sure we're starting in G, right? So we're starting in G. What is the chord at the first fermata? What chord is that? If you're the key of G, it is a four chord. It's a C chord. Yeah. So now we have to ask, is it a four chord or not? So there's two possibilities. We have a C chord at that fermata, and that fermata tells us we're at a cadence. So we're either at a half cadence, we're going to the four chord, or we're modulating to C. And we have to figure out which one it is. Now, the note before it does have an F natural in it, but that could just be a secondary dominant. Remember, that's the seventh of a G chord. And when you have a seventh and you flat it, which is taking an F sharp, making it a natural, that could be a secondary dominant. Or it could be that we've modulated and it's 5-1 in the key of C. How can we tell? So someone tell me if it's a modulation or a secondary dominant and how you know. And you can say it out loud or you can type it in. I don't care how you let me know. But someone tell me, is that a modulation or just a secondary dominant?
Would it be a modulation because in the following measures they flat everything?
That's exactly right. You stay in the key. If it was a secondary dominant, you go right back to F sharps. But instead it's with F naturals, which is key of C. So he's actually modulated. So now we're looking at the modulation. Wow. Does someone want to explain to me if it's a pivot chord modulation or if it's not? And if it is, which one's the pivot chord? By the way, there are two correct answers to that question.
Wouldn't it be a pivot chord? That the C chord is the one that changes it, right?
Well, the F natural changes it, actually. That's the G7 chord, right? You have an F natural that looks like it's a passing tone on measure two.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Oh,
actually
that's
the
right.
seventh. That's actually the seventh of the G7 chord. So there is a pivot chord, but you have to look before the natural. And there's two possible chords that could be pivot chords, depending on whether you see the natural as part of the chord on the downbeat or not. But you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking the right way. It is a pivot chord modulation. This is actually really confusing, so I'll explain it to you. The downbeat of measure two is a G chord. And one could argue the G chord is a five chord in C, but in the key of G, it's a one chord, so it's the pivot chord. And then he adds the seventh to it on and of two. And so your G chord's your pivot. Then he makes it a flat seven, and now you're in the key of C for sure. Or you could say that F natural is part of the chord. The fact it comes in an eighth note late doesn't matter. So then the chord before it is your pivot chord. It can't be, because that chord is a D chord, has an F sharp in it, and C doesn't have an F sharp. So you either have a pivot chord on the downbeat of two, which then changes on the second eighth note of two, or you have to call it a chromatic modulation, where you just are in you have an F sharp that becomes an F natural beat to beat. That's a chromatic modulation. But the modulation is happening there on the first beat of measure two. Who's got questions on that? That's a very difficult one to understand, but if you can see it's a modulation, we're getting there. Who has questions on it? Who's confused? Okay. Now, the next fermata is another cadence point. What chord are we on there? The second fermata is measure five. Yep. Yep. I need one more person to answer. I don't really need it, but it'd be nice. Yeah, and so there's a yes or no question. Is there a modulation between measure two and measure, or the end of measure two and measure five? Is there any modulation there? Just put a Y or an N. Let's make typing easy. So we got a split vote, but the answer is no. There's no modulation because you're in C major at the end of measure two, and you're still in C major in measure five. And so when we hit that tonic C major in measure five, there's an F natural just before it. We're still in C major, so he doesn't modulate at all. Then between three, four, and five, he stays in one key. But then, but then, if you look at measure seven, the second beat, what chord is that? Someone tell me. Yeah, that's all right. I figured that's what you meant. So measure seven, the cadence of measure seven is a D major chord. So is he modulating to D major? Well, if he is, we would expect to have two sharps then. D major has two sharps, an F sharp and a C sharp. Are we seeing F sharps and C sharps? Yes, we are. So he's in fact modulating to D. I mean, D could have been a five chorded G. It could be lots of things. A five chorded, yeah, but it's not, because he's got both sharps in there. I'm not going to ask you to find the pivot chord, because going from C, I guess you can. Yeah, I think the downbeat of measure six is actually a pivot chord. It's a five chord in the key of C, and it's a four chord in the key of D. So I think the downbeat of measure six is your pivot chord. So he takes us to D, and then you can see if I just pace through it, you see that he goes to D minor in measure 10. He's got to get rid of he's got to get rid of the F sharp, so he goes to F naturals. I take it back. This is still D major. I lied to you. I lied to you completely with malice of forethought. But eventually get you back. So that's how we look for modulations. We look for accidentals. We look to see if they continue or if there's secondary dominance. And then we try to figure out how we get there. So is there a pivot chord? And the pivot chord will be the chord right before the accidentals. Or is it just a chromatic change? Can we find a chord that's in both keys or not? And then we can see how these modulations work. And that's how we recognize them. So if you get a piece of music paper and it says, "Is there a modulation?" Look for accidentals. And again, if you only get one accidental, one sharp, it's probably just a secondary dominant. But if the sharp continues, it's probably a, or a flat for that matter, it's probably a modulation. Do you have any questions about that? Give me thumbs up if you're ready for me to move on, as I think modulations are a hard topic and we didn't spend a lot of time on them. I get a thumbs up. I get two thumbs up. Is there a question left? Okay. Guys, I know it's supposed to be private messages, but Leslie says, I like modulations. I love that. That's why I had to share it. Forgive me, Leslie. It was rude of me to share it, but it was just such a nice comment. I had to share it. So let's practice the other side of modulations. Pretend you're in the key of C. You want to modulate to a closely related key. Just write down a chord progression that'll do it for you. A chord progression that'll get there. So you have to write it. Remember, if I go to the whiteboard here, just give me a second. I go to, is that what's called the whiteboard? Yeah, go to the whiteboard. So remember, if you're going to write a modulation, whoops, let's do it in text. It's going to have the original key. It's going to have some chords. I don't know what chords. And then someplace one of those chords is the pivot chord. So then you have to write whatever key you're going to, and then that chord will be in both. Obviously, a 3 is not a 5. I'm just making stuff up, to a 5, to a 5, to a 5, to 1. So a chord progression is going to start in one key. It's going to fall some logic. It's going to hit a pivot chord, and then you're going to be in the new key. You have to write both keys in here. It doesn't matter if this second key that is right at the beginning, or if you put it in over here, where you place that the second thing. But what you want to do is write a chord progression. We're not going to realize it, so you can make it as long as you want. So I'll give you an example of one that I know would work. Let's say I say a 3 chord goes to a 6 chord, goes to a 2 chord, which is a D minor. That's not going to be a good pivot chord. So because I'm going to, if I want to go to F. So let's say I'm going to F. Then my 2 chord is now, it's D minor key of F is a 6 chord. So then the 6 chord could go back to a 4 chord, could go to a 2 chord, and then that could go to a 5 to 1, because a good progression is 3, 6, 2, right? 6 to 4 to 2 to 5 to 1. That's right out of our chord progression chart, which you do have to know. You can bring it with you because it's an open book test, but make sure you know it, how it works. But this chord's in both keys. How do I know that? There's no B in it, and F has a B flat, C does not. That's the only note that's different. So as long as the chord doesn't have the one note that's different in the key signature, I can guarantee that they'll work as a pivot chord. So then there's my pivot chord, and then I just complete the progression. If I play it for you, I think I can play this with, will my sound work? Let's see if I can get it where I can see it. I think it's not going to let me see it and play it. Maybe it will. Hold on. Yeah, so let me just see if I can play it. So here it's, there's your 3 chord, your what? 3 chord, I'm sorry, your 6 chord, your 2. That's now a 6 chord in the key of F. So it goes to its 4 chord, to its 2 chord, to its 5. What's a 5 chord? So I know that progression would work, and then I just improvise the chords because I can read chords. But I just know because this is a chord progression that works. That's a pivot chord that works, and that takes me off to the next thing. So do it in the chat, guys. Put it in the chat so I can see it. Just write a chord progression going from key of C to any closely related key. Okay, first one has come in. And that works. Let me see. Yeah. Yeah, I don't see a reason that wouldn't work. So one has come in. The only challenge with it, guys, I'll show it in a minute, is it went to a distantly related key instead of a closely related key, but that's actually harder to do, so that's good. We'll talk about close and distantly related keys in just a second, but it's a good modulation with a good pivot chord. Yeah, what key are you pivoting to, WL? Oh, that's nice. That's nice. All right. And then I got one more in here. Okay, and then 5 G is a. So there's one problem with one of these, and that's that, yeah, because the F sharp and the F natural is exactly right. That chord won't pivot. The one before it will pivot. So it's the same progression, but the pivot isn't the 2 chord, it's the 3 chord. The 3 chord in C is a 6 chord in G, and that doesn't have the F, and then you don't have a 2 chord, you just have a 5 in G. Does that make sense? So the progression works. It was just labeled wrong. Give me a thumbs up if you understand that, or some note in chat. I'm talking to individuals here, so I don't give everything away. So we had some very good answers here. Basically, you all know what you're looking for. You're looking for this common chord. You're all going to good keys. We had one of you gave me a fully diminished seventh chord and modulated to minor. I love that. And that's one thing we rarely do. I do all my examples on C to F and C to G. But somebody tell me in the chat, if I'm in the key of C major, what are my 5 closely related keys? Remember, a closely related key has no more than one accidental different. So, for example, if I'm in the key of C, the key of F sharp is not a closely related key. It's got lots more sharps than just that. So, looking for one sharp or one flat if I'm in C. What would be the keys that would do that? I got one right answer. Yeah, I got one right answer. Yeah, 2 right answers. Excellent. And so if you think of, I'm going to go over it, but you guys know this answer, but I'll go over it anyway, just because it's a tricky thing. So if I'm the key of C, I either have to add one sharp or one flat. So clearly, key of G major is the one sharp, and E minor, which is its relative minor. The flat would be F major or D minor, which is its relative minor, and then C has no sharps or flats, so it's relative minor A. So basically, if you're in C major, it's the tonic. That's your tonic. It's the dominant, the subdominant, and and everybody's relative minor. Now, if you're in minor, imagine you're in. I'll do A minor just because it's no sharps or flats again. It's just the opposite process. A minor there's no sharps or flats, so A minor and C major, of course. If I add a flat, that's your D minor and F major. And if I add a sharp, it's your E minor and G major. So now it's the same thing. It's the dominant, tonic, and then their relative majors. So it's always five chords. So whatever your key is, you go to the tonic and the dominant of it, and then you either go to the relative minors of all three keys or relative majors of all three keys. And those are your closely related keys. So they're easy to find. Everything else has more sharps or flats. And you can modulate to any key. It's just the further away a key is, the more accidentals, the harder it is to find pivot chords. And when you get to really difficult keys, you have to find some pretty exotic pivot chords, things that you haven't learned yet, Neapolitan chords and German six chords and all kinds of really weird things. You can get from anywhere to anywhere, but the closer you are in relation, the easier it is. Is that clear for everybody? Did I make sense there? Okay. So remember, there are four kinds of modulations, and the pivot chord is the important one, and that's the only one I think I might have you write out a sequence one because you learned that elsewhere. There is the chromatic one, and that's when you have a chord that can't be a pivot chord. It's only in the first key, and then you change an accidental. Now the chord is in the second key. So let's say I'm going from C major here. I'll share this. Let's say I'm going from C major to D major. And at one point, I've got a two chord, five. One point, I've got my sister's a very busy person apparently. There's a two chord, and then I change it to that chord, which is now a five chord in the key of G. You notice there's no pivot chord because you have one chord that has an F natural, that's for the key of C. The very next chord has an F sharp, that's for the key of G. This is what we call chromatic modulation, where you alter the chromatic note, but there's no place for a pivot chord. There's no chord before the chromatic that's in both keys. So that's a chromatic alteration. That's called a chromatic modulation. And then there's the phrase modulation, which is at the end of a phrase, you jump to another key, but you have to come to a cadence, and then you jump to another key. And that's called a phrase modulation because it's the end of a phrase. It's also called a direct modulation because there's no modulation. You just go directly to the new key. And then the last one is the idea of a sequence. And I'll just review this because sequences, this kind of confused everybody. If I have a tune, I could do a sequence that's called I'll take out those last two notes because I'll just confuse it. I could do a sequence, which is writing the same shape, but moving it up a step or up a third or up a fifth or down a step. Let's take it down. Um, why'd you play it right or rest for that? You played. Here is down. Now that's what we call a tonal sequence. And remember this from last quarter. It's called tonal because we stay in the key. So that's a major third, and that's a minor third. We don't try to keep the intervals the same. We keep the shapes the same and just stay in the key. And tonal modulations usually don't modulate. They can, or tonal sequences, but they don't add any accidentals. So they don't normally modulate. But there's also something called the real. And in a real, you try and keep the intervals the same. So major third right there. And then the next one should be a minor third. Is that right? Let's see if I got that right. So now this has exactly the same notes as this one. So this is looking like you're in the key of perhaps B flat, or perhaps it's a dominant chord in E flat. It's hard to know. And if I want to come here and do the same thing, I have a major third, and wait, that should be a minor third. Here we go. That'd be really crazy. But now you can see I can modulate just about anywhere through sequences. Because now I've got all these keys. So in Bach's day, they did most of their modulating using sequences. And all that means is that instead of having a tonal sequence, you have a real sequence. The ear will accept it because it's heard those intervals before. You keep the intervals the same and it will change keys. So those are our four kinds of modulations. Three are in the book, and I will review them one more time. Pivot chord or common chord, same thing, synonyms. A chord that exists in both keys is the last chord before you see the accidentals. The chromatic one, where you can't find a pivot chord, you just have a chord that's in one key, and then you change one of the chromatics in it, and now it's a chord in the new key. Then the phrase or direct modulation, end of a phrase, jump. And finally, using real sequences, real sequences instead of tonal sequences so that it adds accidentals. So are we cool with modulations? Do we know everything we need to know about them? Good. Now remember, on the exam, I may ask for a 3 or 4 chord modulation. I may ask you to put it in 4-part harmony. And what I'll be looking for there is just, can you make the if you have a 7th in it, can you make it go down by step? I may or may not, but be aware that translating into 4-part harmony is a good thing to practice, because somewhere along the line, I'm going to ask for something in 4-part harmony just to make sure your 7ths go. That's how I check voice leading. So be aware we might do that. All right. We have 5 minutes to quickly review form. So let me just review it. All right. I'm going to just do it fast, guys. I'm sorry. I'm going to talk through it instead of ask questions, have you do things. It's a terrible way to teach on Zoom, but I really do want us to get through this last bit. So I'm going to share the whiteboard again. And we have a couple of different forms. And I've been over this a couple times, but it never hurts. There's binary form. And binary is bi, like bicycle. It means 2. So it's just got 2 parts. And they're not going to be the same part. Remember, A does not mean a phrase. It could be 12 phrases, 100 phrases, 1 phrase. It could be anything. It's something that feels like a complete unit. And then B is not just 1 phrase. It can be, but it can be 100 phrases, but it feels like a complete unit. And sometimes, but it's not required, they'll stick repeats in there. And then you get this, and this is still a binary form, but where they stick repeats in. But it's a variation of the main binary form. And by the way, if any of these sections end in a tonic chord in the original key, it's called a closed formal division. It means you're closed before you go on. If it ends on anything else, including a tonic chord where you've modulated, even if it's a perfect authentic cadence, but you've modulated, it's called an open phrase division. And that means that the piece feels like it has to move on. So you can close off after A, or you can have it open after A and move into B that way. That's binary. And then ternary. And am I still in cap lock? Yes. Why not? I think it's spelled that way. That means 3 sections, but it means this 3. A, B, A. It does not mean A, B, C. That's just through composed. Through composed is a phrase when you just keep writing something new all the time. Now, of course, A could be in variation slightly, but it's a full-length version of A. It feels like an A. And you can have repeats in this. Whoops. I got to just stretch that out so this will work. Wait a second. You're not going to let me stretch? Come on. Let me stretch. Okay, I'll write it out here. So if I do it with the repeats, A, and then B, B, and then A again. Usually you'd repeat all 3 sections separately, so that if you have repeats, it usually looks like this. I don't tell you it always does, but it will look something like that. But the repeats are not required. It's just A, B, A. All right, and then we have the rounded binary, which is a hybrid of the 2 of them. This is the rounded binary. And so it's 2 sections. There's an A and there's sort of a B section. But the B section's weird. It's the first part of B, which is new, is very short. And then the second part of B is as a half of A. So the B section is made up of 2 parts. A small B that really doesn't stand on its own very well, and then a shortened version of A that doesn't stand on its own very well, but together they make a unit. So it's a binary form. It's A and it's this thing, but it looks a lot like ternary form because there's an A and there's a B and there's an A, but the B is short, the A is short, and so it just forms a unit. And again, we can have repeats on this. So the repeats can look like this. It could look like A, and then B, 1/2 A, and then B, 1/2 A, because the B, A thing acts like one unit. You repeat it together. So if you have repeat bars around this, that usually tells you it's a rounded binary. If you have 3 repeats, it usually tells you it's a ternary. And those are our 3 forms. And they make up the foundations of what we call the simple forms, the main parts of music up until we get to the complicated things like rondos and sonatas and crazy stuff. And just the last note for all of you guys who like popular music, particularly Great American Song, if I take an ABA and I repeat the first part but not the second, I end up with American song form, or American Standard song form, AABA. That's the standard form of the chorus in American song. Verse would come first. And you have this A, B, A. We call that B the bridge or the release. And it probably has 1,000 other names by now. Every genre renames that darn B. But anyway, you get A, the bridge, and then back to the A. And all that is a version of ternary form with a repeat in here. Although some people say it's a 4-part form because it's so standard. And you could say that too, because form is an art form and not a science. So that's the last 2 chapters summed up in 5 minutes. Do we have any questions on that? Are we relatively comfortable with that?
I don't really understand the second part of ternary. The second one that you wrote with A B A prime A B B.
Oh, okay. So all this is, I'm sorry, this thing here, that shouldn't be there. That's written there because it ran out of ink. And then I couldn't get back to it to erase it because I don't know how to use this darn whiteboard. So ignore ternary is ABA. This ABA prime ABB, that's just a mess up. I mean, I couldn't, here, I'll erase it. Let me see if I can erase it without erasing everything. No, took everything out. So that's why you didn't understand it, is that this ternary is simply ABA. Okay? Thanks, Daviel. That's what I get for putting things on a whiteboard without an eraser. So once again, let me tell you, I know we have one more day, Monday. We're going to do it, and I think that there will be. We can take in progress if you have to, in which case take the ear training and come back for the test. Just let me know. But the important thing is open book, and that it's been a great year. The next time any of us meet will be in person. Thank goodness. And I will probably be able to tell you this on Monday, but it has been a joy, and I'll repeat that every time I see you. Have a fantastic weekend. Have a great set of finals, and congratulations on a very successful year, you guys. So bye bye. See you Monday morning.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye bye.